we are now going to move into the organelles that are so important in that they provide energy for the cell. Chloroplast. Chloroplast is where photosynthesis occurs. Photosynthesis, you should know, is when a plant takes, or algae, or a bacteria even, takes carbon dioxide and water, and using the solar energy from the sun, solar energy, it produces glucose, C6H12O6 plus oxygen gas. If I balance it, I'd have to put sixes on these. Okay, photosynthesis takes energy stored in the sun and puts it into the energy between the carbon bonds in glucose. Okay, so it converts the solar energy into actual chemical bond energy in glucose. We can't do that. Plants can, algae can, some photosynthetic bacteria sure can. So the organelle in these kind of organisms that can convert sunlight energy into food bond energy are called chloroplasts. The other energy organelle that all eukaryotes have is the mitochondria. Okay, it does the opposite. It takes the carbon, it takes the glucose that the plant made, we ate, and combines oxygen with it. Because that's why we have to breathe oxygen, and breaks it down to CO2, carbon dioxide plus water, plus a lot of energy that's stored in ATP, the energy coin that you can spend anywhere in a cell when you have to do work. So mitochondria is in all eukaryotic cells. So here's the cutaway picture of a chloroplast. We're not going to have to know all these details right now, but for now, there's two spaces. Actually, there's two membranes, like the cell membrane, like the nuclear membrane. There's the outer membrane. Then there's a space between them called the intermembrane space, fluid-filled space. And then there's another membrane called the inner membrane. Okay, and then beyond that, as we go inside the chloroplast, there's a fluid-filled space called the stroma. So that's the inner space. And then inside that fluid-filled space are these stacks of discs called the thylakoids. Okay, so the thylakoid membrane is shaped like a bunch of discs. Each of those membranes is full of chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is the green pigment. That absorbs sunlight. And inside each of the thylakoid is another space. These are like hollow coins. And that's called the thylakoid space. So if I took one of these and showed it, inside would be, there'd be a cavity, and that'd be the thylakoid space. when we talk about photosynthesis, different processes occur, different stages of photosynthesis occurs in different parts of the chloroplast, which we'll have to get to later. Okay, here's some plant cells, and plant cells, you can see, are full of green blobs, and those green blobs are chloroplasts. Okay, mitochondria looks like a bacteria cell almost, as does a chloroplast, except it's green. Okay, so same thing. Mitochondria has two layers, two membranes. It has an outer membrane and then a highly folded inside an inner membrane, very folded up, a lot of surface area. Okay, between inner membrane space between the outer and the inner membrane is called the inner membrane space. Okay, just like it is in a chloroplast. Inside, space inside the surrounded by the inner membrane is called the matrix. The matrix. That's like this. That's like the stroma in the chloroplast. Again, the purpose of the mitochondria is to convert the chemical energy stored in the glucose bonds into the energy of ATP, which is like the energy coin that can be spent anywhere the cell needs to do work. Okay, remember that plants have to have mitochondria too. They can't just make the glucose and not be able to break it down like the mitochondria can. Because the mitochondria and chloroplasts are about the same size of bacteria. And they even have their own DNA, which is weird. There's a theory called endosymbiosis that these used to be free-living bacteria, and that they were engulfed by a bigger cell, and instead of digesting them, they kept on living in this bigger cell, and because there was benefits of protection for these bacteria as they were housed in these bigger cells, and there was a benefit of the bigger cell getting either glucose from the chloroplast like bacteria or ATP from the chloroplast like from the mitochondria like bacteria. It became a relationship that became an important part of being a eukaryotic cell. And the mitochondria and chloroplasts have to divide like cells when the cell, the eukaryotic cell, is going to do cell division. So the mitochondria and the chloroplasts are not coded for in our DNA. They have their own DNA, and they do cell division in a way. They divide themselves like a bacteria would before cell division occurs in the eukaryotic cell. So That's why the idea of endosymbiosis is pretty well established as a theory that a lot of scientists believe was important for the evolution of us and plants from single-celled organisms, the evolution of organelles. So here's a summary of what I was explaining. You might want to read through that. Okay, what converts food energy into chemical energy? So that'd be glucose energy into usable chemical energy that the cell can use as ATP energy. So that would be a mitochondria. Mitochondria is singular for mitochondria. What organelle converts solar energy into chemical energy stored in the glucose? Chloroplast. Photosynthesis is a process. All eukaryotes have all the following organelles except chloroplast. Animals don't have them, but everything else, all these other items, both plants and animals and the other kingdoms have. Which of the following is not true of mitochondria and chloroplast? Yeah, that's not true. I just said it. Mitochondria are all eukaryotic cells, but chloroplasts are only in photosynthetic cells like plants and algae, and this is true. And that's evidence for the theory of endosymbiosis. Again, this is true. Another piece of evidence that points towards endosymbiosis. Okay, which of the pieces of evidence below is not really evidence? It does not provide evidence. So mitochondria and chloroplasts have their own DNA. That is true, separate from the nuclear DNA. The nucleus is DNA. How about part B? Mitochondria and chloroplasts both come from pre-existing mitochondria. Yeah, it doesn't come from the DNA in the nucleus. So those are evidence. I want something that isn't evidence. So I'm putting X for it, but those are pieces of evidence that are valid. The DNA mitochondria and chloroplast resembles the DNA found in the nucleus. Well, it's made out of nucleotides, but otherwise, no. And the point is that it's much less. It's unique from the DNA in the nucleus. Okay, so that is false. So that's my answer. DNA, mitochondria, chloroplast resemble that bacteria. Yeah. So that's contradictory to letter C because it's true. So I'm not going to pick that. Which of the following contains DNA? Well, nucleus does. Lysosome doesn't unless it's eating up mitochondria or a chloroplast. So mitochondria and chloroplasts do too as well. So the first and third ones. So let's talk about some other organelles that we haven't mentioned. Okay, now if you look at a plant cell, you see this very solid cell wall. And you don't see a cytoskeleton. There's no cytoskeleton because it's not necessary because it has this very rigid cell wall that gives structure to the plant. Okay, but you have this huge water vacuole that keeps the inside pressurized and in place. So it's like a giant balloon, but it's full of water. That's called a central vacuole. It's huge. You see chloroplasts. Chloroplasts are not in animal cells. Okay, but all the red things obviously are shared between all the red framed names are shared by both plants and animals' cells. So a central vacuole can also be found in a paramecium, which is a protist, a protozoan, in kingdom Protista. And what that is right here, it's called a contractile vacuole. When water osmosis is in, what happens is the organisms, to prevent bloating, because water's flowing in, because there's a higher solute concentration inside the cytoplasm than there is outside, it just squeezes that water out. The vacuole contracts and squirts that water out. So that's kind of an interesting thing. And then there can be big food vacuoles because these organisms digest inside the cell. Intracellular digestion. They phagocytose their food, and then the food vacuole binds with a lysosome, which digests the food inside. White blood cells have this kind of mechanism of making a food vacuole, except the food is a germ, a bacteria. So in plant cells, this central vacuole is primarily storing water. It applies what we call turgor, or pressure from within inside the cell. Turgor, pressure. And it pushes outward, but it won't blow, the cell will not blow up, explode, because there's a rigid cell wall around this cell which won't break. The water vacuole, or the central vacuole, also stores chemicals, pigments, and waste products. You won't see such a large central vacuole in any animal cell or a protist. Okay, I talked about the contractile vacuole, how it pumps out water so that the protist doesn't get too much internal pressure and blow up because of osmosis. So right here we see the contractile vacuoles. Here you see some food vacuoles. And probably some of this looks like a food vacuole that has been fused to a lysosome, because it's all blackish inside. Okay, other eukaryotes have a cell wall besides just plants. Fungi have a cell wall. Fungi cells have a cell wall as well. Plants, the cell wall is made of cellulose. And fungi, cell walls are made of chitin. These are both carbohydrates, polysaccharides. Once again, the turgor pressure replaces the cytoskeleton, because when that central vacuole gets filled with water, it applies the pressure against the cell wall against the cytoplasm, pushing the things against the cell wall. And that's how a plant can be stiff and stand up. When there's not enough water in the central vacuole, the plant gets limp. And you can see that in Florida on hot days where the soil is dry, the plants are just limp. And here's a picture of what's happening. Okay, so animal cells have these organelles that plant cells don't have, centrioles. Okay, though if you look back at the picture, they look like perpendicular little Twizzlers that got cut up. Okay, and these make the spindle fibers that catch the chromosomes and position them correctly so that during cell division, each new cell gets the proper number of chromosomes and the correct chromosomes. Okay, these guys spew out spindle fibers, which are protein microtubules. Okay, plants don't have them. They have something similar, but they're not really distinct things that you can see on a microscope, but you can see spots when a plant's doing cell division where the microtubule fibers are coming out of, but they don't look distinct like they do in animal cells. Okay, lysosomes, plants don't need them. They have vacuoles that do it, that get rid of waste materials. Then cytoskeleton. Well, I've been kind of misleading you. All cells have some cytoskeleton, but it's not very useful in plants because it doesn't really need it because it has the turgor pressure. But animal cells have a very thick, complicated cytoskeleton because they don't have a cell wall to give them shape, or there's nothing to prevent all the stuff from, all the organelles to glum up together on one side of the cell. If you didn't have a cytoskeleton, that prevents it in animal cells. Here's an actual picture of cells that have been dyed with a chemical that sticks to the microtubule fibers. And so we can see in these images all those little, looks like threads. The nucleus is the blue thing, but all around it are these threads, which are part of the cytoskeleton. The threads being microtubules and fibers, protein. Okay, we don't have to get into the different kinds of protein fibers, but right here you can see a good drawing of the cytoskeleton and how it attaches to the organelles, keeping the organelles in position. Let's continue with these questions. Organelle found in plant cells that stores water. Well, that's the vacuole, the central vacuole. And other important substances, waste products, pigments. Food vacuoles are primarily found in what organisms? Well, protozoans. They actually eat little microscopic food things and bring that phagocytosis it into their body, into their cell. They're only one cell big. And then send the lysosome to eat it up. What is true about vacuoles? Only plants have them? No, we have vacuoles too. Not as big. Protists have them too. Yeah, that's true. Letter B is true. Well, so is letter C. The water vacuole, the central vacuole, maintains pressure, turgor pressure, so that the plant cell is stiff, like a skeleton almost. So B and C are correct. When a flower blooms, it's because the central vacuoles and petals are full with water. What? Well, kinda. They're full of water with pigment in it. So I would say yeah. Or the flower petals wouldn't be stiff. So I'm going to say that's true. Okay, so what are the parts of the cytoskeleton? Well, the nuclear envelope is not that part of the cytoskeleton. It's connected to the cytoskeleton, but it's not part of the cytoskeleton. So these are different kind of protein fibers, which you don't really have to memorize. A cytoskeleton makes proteins from amino acids. What? Carries out? No. What? Gives an animal cell structure and shape. Ding. Which of the following is not a known function of the cytoskeleton? So not attain a critical limit on cell size? No. To provide mechanical support to the cell? Yeah. Structure. To maintain the characteristic shape of the cell? Yes. Or at least an animal cell. To guide the movements of macromolecules and organelles? Yeah, they're like little roadways that the either hold them in place or move vesicles and lysosomes. Like there's little protein motors that move organelles on these cytoskeleton fibers, roads as it were. Okay, it was found in animal cells but not plant cells. Well, a lot of people want to say mitochondria, but mitochondria is found in both animals and plants. Centrioles only in animals. So that would be it. Chloroplasts, no, they're only found in animal cells. I'm sorry, plant cells. So chloroplasts aren't found in animal cells at all. Ribosomes found in both. So it's centrioles. You can do it by process elimination, even if you didn't know that. What is centriole? That little fact about a centriole. Which of the following is common to both animal cells and plant cells? No, not large central vacuole. That's a plant thing. Cytoskeleton, yeah, kinda, but it's only really significant in animal cells, so I'm going to skip that. Chloroplast, no. The plasma membrane is the cell membrane, of course. They both have that.